Have you ever tried to explain a profound realization only to be met with blank stares? Shared an original idea and watched it fall flat? Felt like your thoughts exist on a frequency that others simply cannot tune into? You're not broken, you're not arrogant, and you're definitely not alone. According to both 19th century philosophy and 21st century neuroscience, there's a profound, measurable reason why original thinkers experience chronic misunderstanding. And understanding this might be the most liberating insight you encounter today. Friedrich Nietzsche spent much of his life in devastating intellectual isolation. His ideas were too radical, too far ahead of his time. But he didn't see this as a personal failure. He saw it as an inevitable consequence of original thought. In his work, Schopenhauer as Educator, Nietzsche writes about what he calls untimeliness, the state of being temporally displaced from your own era. Original thinkers, he argues, are essentially time travelers. They speak a language their generation hasn't learned yet. They reference concepts that don't yet have names. They see patterns invisible to contemporary eyes. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche introduces the concept of pathos der Distanz, the pathos of distance. This isn't about arrogance or superiority. It's about the inevitable gap that forms between those who create new values and those who inherit them. When you're inventing the map, you can't expect people who are still reading old maps to understand your route. He writes, "The essential thing in a good and healthy aristocracy is that it does not feel itself to be a function, either of the monarchy or of the commonwealth, but as their meaning and highest justification." Replace aristocracy with original thinker, and you understand the point. Those who create meaning cannot expect to be understood by those who merely consume it. Let's ground this in numbers. Research by Dean Keith Simonton at UC Davis, published in Origins of Genius in 1999, analyzed thousands of creative individuals across history. His findings: truly original ideas typically take 10 to 20 years to gain acceptance, and the most revolutionary ideas often aren't recognized until after their creator's death. A study in the Journal of Creative Behavior in 2016 by James Kaufman found that highly creative individuals score significantly higher on measures of social isolation and report feeling misunderstood 3 to 4 times more frequently than the general population. This isn't correlation, it's causation. The same cognitive traits that enable original thinking also create communication barriers. Here's where philosophy meets hard science. When you feel fundamentally different from others, you're not imagining it. Your brain literally processes information differently. The default mode network, or DMN, is the system of brain regions that activates when you're not focused on the external world, when you're daydreaming, introspecting, or thinking creatively. Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman and colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania conducted fMRI studies showing that highly creative individuals have unusual connectivity patterns in their DMN. Their research, published in the Cambridge Handbook of the Neuroscience of Creativity in 2018, reveals that creative brains show more communication between brain regions that typically don't interact in average brains. Specifically, creative thinkers show increased connectivity between the default mode network, which handles imagination and future thinking, the executive control network, which manages focus and planning, and the salience network, which controls attention and filtering. In most brains, these networks work in opposition, like a seesaw, but in creative brains, they work simultaneously. This is called cognitive flexibility, and it's a gift and a curse. You can hold contradictory ideas, see multiple perspectives, and make unusual connections. But this means your thought process is fundamentally different from how most people think. There's a cognitive filter called latent inhibition, your brain's ability to ignore stimuli it has previously determined to be irrelevant. This is crucial for functioning in daily life. Research by Jordan Peterson and Shelley Carson at Harvard in 2003 discovered that highly creative individuals have lower latent inhibition. They notice things others filter out automatically. Every conversation contains more data. Every experience creates more associations. Every concept connects to more ideas. Published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, their study found that low latent inhibition combined with high IQ predicts creative achievement. But here's the catch. You're processing exponentially more information than the person you're talking to. When you speak, you're referencing this vast web of connections. They're hearing only the surface. Your brain stores knowledge in semantic networks, vast webs of interconnected concepts. When you hear the word freedom, your brain activates not just the definition, but an entire constellation of related ideas, memories, emotions, and associations. Research from MIT's Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences using computational neuroscience models shows that people with high crystallized intelligence and broad knowledge bases have exponentially more complex semantic networks. A study by Canet and colleagues in 2014 in the Journal of Complex Networks used mathematical network analysis to map semantic structures. The finding: creative individuals have semantic networks with more connections between seemingly unrelated concepts, shorter paths between distant ideas, and greater small-world properties, high clustering with short path lengths. When you use a word, you're activating thousands of connections. The listener might activate dozens. You're speaking in 4K, they're hearing in standard definition. It's not a communication problem. It's a fundamental difference in cognitive architecture. Communication isn't just about words. It's about brain synchronization. And when your brain works differently, synchronization becomes nearly impossible. Princeton neuroscientist Uri Hasson made a groundbreaking discovery about how communication actually works at the neural level. In his 2010 study, Brain-to-Brain Coupling, published in Trends in Cognitive Sciences, he put speakers and listeners in separate fMRI machines and recorded their brain activity during communication. The finding was stunning. During successful communication, the listener's brain activity literally mirrors the speaker's brain activity with a slight delay. The same regions activate in the same sequence. This is called neural coupling, and it's how understanding actually happens, not through words alone, but through synchronized brain states. But here's the critical part. Neural coupling only occurs when speaker and listener share similar conceptual frameworks, background knowledge, cognitive models, and semantic networks. When there's a significant gap in any of these areas, coupling fails. The speaker's brain activates regions that simply don't activate in the listener. It's not that they're not listening. Their brain literally cannot follow where yours is going. Cognitive psychologist Elizabeth Newton's famous 1990 Stanford study demonstrated what she called the curse of knowledge with elegant simplicity. She had people tap out the rhythm of well-known songs and estimate how many listeners would recognize the tune. The tappers predicted 50% success. The actual rate, 2.5%. A catastrophic overestimation. Why? Once you know something deeply, your brain cannot simulate not knowing it. Neuroimaging studies by Birch and Bloom in 2007 at Yale showed that when experts try to adopt a novice perspective, their brains still activate expert-level networks. You literally cannot dumb yourself down enough to meet people where they are. Additional research by Kammerer, Lowenstein, and Weber in 1989 in the Journal of Political Economy found that experts underestimate the difficulty of their field by 300 to 400%. If you've spent years developing expertise, you've forgotten what it's like to not have those neural pathways built. Your simple explanation activates complex networks they don't have. Psychologists Boaz Kesar and Dale Griffin identified another phenomenon, the illusion of transparency, our tendency to overestimate how well our internal states are communicated to others. Their research, published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology in 2001, showed that people believe their emotions, intentions, and thoughts are about twice as obvious to others as they actually are. When your thoughts are complex and your emotional experiences are nuanced, this gap becomes a chasm. You think you're being clear. Your facial expressions, tone, and words feel transparent to you. But brain imaging studies show that internal experience and external expression activate completely different neural pathways. What's crystal clear in your mind is often invisible to others. It's not just that people don't understand new ideas. They actively resist them. And this resistance isn't conscious malice. It's hardwired into our evolutionary psychology. In The Gay Science and Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche articulates his most controversial idea, herd morality. The majority, he argues, finds profound comfort in shared beliefs and conventional wisdom, not because these beliefs are true, but because they're shared. Original thinkers threaten this comfort at a fundamental level. They're not just suggesting a different answer. They're questioning the questions themselves. They're challenging the entire framework of how people think. And the herd, Nietzsche observed, would rather be comfortably wrong together than uncomfortably right alone. He writes, "Madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, peoples, and ages, it is the rule. The crowd has its own logic, its own momentum, and that momentum crushes what doesn't conform." Solomon Asch's famous 1951 conformity experiments showed that 75% of people will give an obviously incorrect answer if a group does. But this was dismissed as mere social pressure until neuroscience revealed something darker. Gregory Burns at Emory University repeated Asch's experiments inside an fMRI machine. His 2005 study, published in Biological Psychiatry, revealed something shocking. Conformity doesn't just involve social brain regions, it actually changes activity in perception areas. When people conform, brain regions associated with visual perception and spatial awareness activate. They're not just lying to fit in, they literally see things differently to maintain group cohesion. The brain will rewire perception itself to avoid the psychological cost of disagreeing with the group. For 99% of human history, being excluded from the group meant death. Evolutionary psychologists like Robin Dunbar explain that our brains evolved in small tribal groups where conformity was survival. Research published in Proceedings of the Royal Society B in 2013 by Whiten and colleagues shows that social conformity isn't a bug, it's a feature. Conformity allowed our ancestors to learn complex skills through imitation, maintain group cohesion, avoid dangerous innovations, and signal tribal membership. But in the modern world, where innovation drives progress and truth matters more than tribal belonging, this ancient wiring becomes a liability. Your brain is running 200,000-year-old software in a world that desperately needs new ideas. Psychologist John Jost's system justification theory, developed over decades of research at NYU, explains why people defend systems that harm them. Published in Political Psychology in 2004, the theory shows that humans have a psychological need to perceive the existing social order as fair, legitimate, and justified. Novel ideas threaten system justification. They suggest the current way is wrong, which creates cognitive dissonance. fMRI studies show that challenges to deeply held worldviews activate the amygdala, the brain's threat center. Your new idea isn't just questioned intellectually, it's perceived as a threat at a primitive, emotional level. A meta-analysis of 181 studies by Jost and colleagues in 2008 found that system justification is stronger when people feel uncertain or threatened. When cognitive load is high, they're tired or stressed, and when the status quo benefits them, even slightly. Translation: the people most likely to resist your ideas are those who most need stability and certainty. which in uncertain times is almost everyone. Nietzsche wasn't alone in recognizing this pattern. Throughout history, the deepest thinkers have grappled with the loneliness of original thought. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, writing in the 1840s, developed an entire philosophy around the distinction between the individual and the crowd. In the present age, he writes, "A crowd in its very concept is the untruth, by reason of the fact that it renders the individual completely impenitent and irresponsible, or at least weakens his sense of responsibility by reducing it to a fraction." Kierkegaard observed that truth is always personal and subjective. The crowd can only deal in abstractions, generalities, and lowest common denominator thinking. To truly exist as an individual, what he called becoming subjective, requires standing apart from the crowd. Not arrogantly, but authentically. He predicted that mass media would make this worse. In an age of constant communication, he argued, genuine understanding would become rarer because everyone would be speaking to everyone, which means no one speaks to anyone. Schopenhauer, Nietzsche's philosophical predecessor, offered the famous hedgehog's dilemma in Parerga and Paralipomena. Imagine hedgehogs on a cold night. They move close for warmth, but their spines prick each other. They move apart, but get cold. They must find the optimal distance, close enough for some warmth, far enough to avoid injury. Schopenhauer saw this as a metaphor for human intellectual and emotional relationships. The deeper and more original your thoughts, the sharper your spines. You want connection, but close contact causes pain, both to you and others. Most people solve this by dulling their spines, conforming their thoughts. But original thinkers keep their sharpness and accept the necessary distance. He writes, "Whoever lives 2 or 3 generations feels like the spectator who, during the fair, sees the performances of all kinds of jugglers, and if he remains seated in the booth, sees them repeated 2 or 3 times." When you think deeply, you see patterns others don't. You see the repetition, the recycling of ideas. This creates isolation, because you cannot unsee it. In his essay, Self-Reliance, from 1841, Emerson addresses this directly. To be great is to be misunderstood. He lists examples. Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton. Is it so bad, then, to be misunderstood? Emerson argues that misunderstanding isn't just an unfortunate side effect of greatness, it's a prerequisite. If your ideas are immediately understood and embraced, they're probably not new. The very fact of misunderstanding signals that you're saying something genuinely novel. So how do you live with this knowledge? How do you function when your brain works differently, when communication fails at a neural level, when society actively resists what you offer? The philosophers and scientists offer guidance, not easy answers, but honest ones. Nietzsche's first teaching: stop expecting symmetry. Understanding is not a mutual phenomenon for everyone. Research in social psychology confirms this. Studies on intellectual humility by Mark Leary at Duke University in 2017 show that accepting the limits of mutual understanding actually improves relationships. When you stop expecting everyone to get you, you stop resenting them for not getting you. The practical application: tier your communication. Some people get the full depth. Some get the accessible version. Some get small talk. This isn't being fake, it's being strategic with your energy and authentic in your expectations. The internet has created something unprecedented in human history: the ability to find your cognitive tribe, regardless of geography. Evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar points out that humans evolved to have a cognitive capacity for about 150 meaningful relationships, Dunbar's number. But we evolved expecting those 150 to be whoever happened to live nearby. Now you can find 150 people anywhere on Earth who think the way you do. Practical steps. Seek out specialized communities around your interests. Engage in depth, not breadth. Quality over quantity. Use online platforms to find intellectual peers. Attend conferences, workshops, meetups in your field. Remember, it only takes a few people who truly understand to eliminate the feeling of isolation. The Curse of Knowledge research by Chip and Dan Heath in Made to Stick offers practical techniques for bridging the gap without dumbing down. Use analogies from shared experience. Build bridges from known to unknown. Tell stories rather than explain concepts. Show practical applications before theory. Use the ladder of abstraction. Move up and down between concrete and abstract. The key: you're not simplifying your ideas. You're building scaffolding so others can climb to where you are. Nietzsche's ultimate solution: stop arguing and start creating. In his later years, he abandoned trying to convince his contemporaries and instead wrote for posthumous readers, people who wouldn't be born for generations. This is liberating. Your blog post, your art, your research, your book, these persist. They find their audience in their own time. You don't need everyone now to understand. You need your work to exist. Research on creative legacy by Dean Simonton shows that impact often increases after death because the work finally finds its appropriate audience, freed from the biases of its time. Schopenhauer and Nietzsche reframe solitude. It's not punishment for being different. It's the necessary condition for depth. Neuroscience supports this. Research on creativity consistently shows that breakthrough insights require extended periods of solitary thought. A study by Kaufman and Gregoire in Wired to Create in 2015 found that highly creative individuals need significantly more alone time than average. The shift from "I'm lonely because I'm misunderstood" to "I need solitude to do the work that matters to me." One is victimhood, the other is purpose. Let's bring this full circle. Feeling misunderstood isn't a bug in your psychology. It's a feature of depth. Nietzsche knew it philosophically. Neuroscience proves it biologically. Psychology explains it socially. Evolutionary science roots it in our history. Your brain has unusual connectivity patterns. Your semantic networks are more complex. Your latent inhibition is lower. Your thoughts activate brain regions others don't access. This means communication will always be asymmetric. Neural coupling will often fail. The curse of knowledge is your constant companion. And society, wired for conformity by 200,000 years of evolution, will resist your ideas at a primitive neurological level. Not because they're bad ideas, but because they're new. But here's what matters. Every philosophical breakthrough, scientific revolution, artistic movement, and social transformation came from people who were profoundly misunderstood in their time. Galileo, Darwin, Van Gogh, Einstein, Tesla, the list is endless. The question was never, why don't they understand? The question is, am I remaining true to what I know, regardless of understanding? As Nietzsche wrote in Ecce Homo, I am not a man, I am dynamite. Some people are meant to transform, not to fit in. Some minds are meant to illuminate, even if recognition comes later. Some thoughts are meant to exist, even if they're temporarily alone. If you feel misunderstood, congratulations. Your brain works. Now go do something with it that matters. If this resonated with you, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to Mindros for more deep dives into the intersection of philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. Because some minds need more than surface-level content.